Well, Singapore is very tightly integrated into the Chinese economy. Dimension is the fact that people of Indian origin so prominently over there became an attractive magnet for Indian students wanting to go abroad for higher study. Singapore, because of magnificent port and harbour that it has traditionally had, is a useful stopping point for our naval vessels. There is a tendency, because of the US-China contestations and because of our own difficulties with China on the land border, we tend to view everything through a highly securitized China prism.
Prime Minister Narendra Modi has landed in Singapore and is scheduled to meet the country's top leadership, including Prime Minister Lawrence Wong. This is a visit that comes on the back of India and Singapore's growing relationship over the last couple of years, especially on key issues like defense, trade and investment, as well as technology. The Indian side has made clear that going into this visit, looking at advanced technologies like semiconductors is going to be a key interest for New Delhi. But to break this whole thing down and to explain the India-Singapore relationship, how it's evolved over the last couple of years and generally over the last couple of decades, is India's former High Commissioner to Singapore, TCA Raghavan. Ambassador Raghavan, thank you so much for joining us here on India Today Global. Could you begin by just laying out why Singapore matters? It's a country of 5 to 6 million people, but a country that's been crucial to our outreach to Southeast Asia. Could you just begin by mapping a little bit for us how the relationship has evolved since the 1990s, why Singapore was so essential to India?
Well, thank you. You see, the India-Singapore relationship has many dimensions, but the trade and investment relationship is at the heart of, at the core of it. And this has largely to do, in my view, not so much because of inherent complementarities between India and Singapore, but because of the way Singapore has refashioned itself and emerged as a major global trading platform and global financial center. And as our own economy started to open up from the 1990s onwards, it was felt that a closer relationship with a global financial center and a global investment hub like Singapore would assist our own growth story. So at the core of it, the economic relationship began in that context. Of course, there are many other dimensions to the India-Singapore story. One important dimension is the fact that people of Indian origin have established themselves so prominently over there. And this again is to do with the way Singapore has consciously constructed itself as a pluralistic and multicultural society. 80% of Singapore is ethnically Chinese, 10% are ethnic Indians, and these are the descendants of traders from the mid-19th century and plantation indentured workers from about the same time. Their descendants have played a vital part in Singapore emerging as a modern city-state. So the fact that it was a multicultural and pluralistic society also made it a magnet for many Indians who are trying to find a trading platform because of the structural rigidities which had come into our own global cities such as Chennai, Mumbai, and Kolkata. Mm-hmm. And Singapore provided just that ideal platform. And today, as is well known, it is the location of a very large number of Indian expatriates, many of whom have become Singapore nationals who are highly trained professionals. It is also a major location for Indian businesses to raise capital abroad and so on. So I think these aspects are important. Mm-hmm. Over the years, other aspects of the relationship have also emerged. Singapore, again, this has to do with internal change and the way Singapore has, as I said, refashioned itself. It has become a knowledge hub, education hub. And again, because of structural rigidities and deficiencies in India, it became an attractive it became an attractive magnet for Indian students wanting to go abroad for higher study.
Understood, sir.
So
So, if I could ask you a question in terms of, apart from the trade and investment side of the relationship, in fact, on that, you said something very interesting that the economic survey pointed out that the Indian government may be reconsidering in some measure its approach to investments from China. And in that regard, Singapore's status as a global hub for investment and trade and really a major gateway for FDI investments into India would become extremely important. Could I ask you to explain that bit of what you were trying to say in your piece in the Indian Express today?
well, Singapore is very tightly integrated into the Chinese economy. And in many ways, Singapore also played an important role in China's own growth story in the 1980s and 1990s. And there are many Singapore companies who have a great deal of exposure to China. In case we do open up to Chinese FDI, as was mentioned in the economic survey, if that happens, it may not, because it's a subject issue of some debate. If that happens, I would imagine that Singapore companies would also play a role in that process of Chinese investment coming to India.
Understood. So, and if I may ask you to explain a part of the India-Singapore relationship that isn't commented on as much, the security and defense side of things. There have, of course, been defense exercises between the two countries. Could I ask you to comment on how India sees Singapore as part of its deepening relationships in Southeast Asia when it comes to defense and security, and how Singapore, vice versa, looks at having India's defense presence in its part of the world?
Well, Singapore, because of the magnificent port and harbor that it has traditionally had, is a useful stopping point for our naval vessels when they go further into from the Indian to the Pacific Ocean, and so in that sense, it makes sense for a naval relationship between India and Singapore. And over the years, a military relationship has developed because the Singapore army lacks sufficient area to carry out training, and we provide them certain training facilities in India. So, because of those factors, the defense relationship has developed. I would caution against giving it too much importance. You know, there is a tendency, because of the U.S.-China contestations and because of our own difficulties with China on the land border, we tend to view everything through a highly securitized China prism. I think it's important to understand that Singapore greatly values its relationship with China, is deeply troubled about the US-China contestation, and certainly it is worried about Chinese maritime assertion in the South China Sea, and therefore wants to develop relations with other countries to balance China in the region. But its instinct is not to see the India-China relationship as a zero-sum game from its perspective, because its vital interests lie in having very strong relations with China, as also strong relations with India. So I would caution against viewing India-Singapore relations through a highly securitized prism because of our own concerns with regard to Chinese military assertion.
Understood, sir. And my final question that has gotten a lot of interest here in India is the semiconductor piece of the equation. The Prime Minister, of course, also going to visit advanced technology factories while he's in Singapore. Could I ask you to give a sense of how Singapore fits into those plans that India has to really transform itself into a country that can develop advanced technologies, especially semiconductors?
But Singapore has, tried to make itself a knowledge hub. And from that knowledge hub, it is now trying to move into or is moving into areas of new and frontier technologies, including semiconductors. Its perception is that it has to move away from traditional industries and go into higher technology areas. Now, because of our own intentions to develop the semiconductor industry, there is a natural complementarity which is emerging in the field of semiconductors with regard to cooperation between India and Singapore.
Understood, sir. Ambassador Raghavan, thank you so much for joining us on India Today Global and for explaining what's happening on the India-Singapore relationship.